Increasingly, we're seeing gun makers abandon the muzzle-heavy designs of yesteryear for more balanced designs. The muzzle-heavy ones made sense in the age of the 40 Smith & Wesson, but most everyone is shooting 9 now. So what happens when I take this gun and monkey with where its center of balance is? Which setup will get the best results? Welcome back to the Humble Marksman channel. I'm David, and a few years ago I made a video on gun balance in Glocks that maybe some of you have seen. And now I've got, better cameras. I got a high-speed camera now, and I wanted to see what would happen if I manipulated the weight of the Canik Rival S. So we're revisiting that concept. I was pretty interested in the results from this test, but before I share those with you, first I need to give a shout out to all my dads in the audience. Guys, you have the most important job in the world, so I hope you're taking it as seriously as it warrants and doing the best job that you can. Well, I can't give you a crisp high five in person. I can give you this. What do you call a potato that procrastinates? A hesitator. All right, super serious mode. Back to talking about pistols. So the base condition of the Canik Rival S is already pretty balanced. Now, what I had done is I had ditched the plastic grips for the more grippy palm swell Veloces from LOK Grips, and this allows me to get onto the gun and stay glued to it a little bit better. I'm kind of a big fan of these grips. But this tungsten guide rod from W74 Guide Rods adds about 1.5 ounces to the gun of non-reciprocating mass towards the muzzle. And these 9 ounce and 12.5 ounce grips add significant weight to the back of the gun. So if you couple all of those with a Surefire X300, and on top of that, maybe swap in some tungsten batteries from W74 Guide Rod. So there's a bunch of variables that you can play with there. We kitted up the gun in various configurations. I would shoot the high-speed version of the video just to see how the gun is recoiling, but then I would also shoot a practical array, which is really just 5 shots at 10 yards and 5 shots at 25 yards, pulling the trigger at a fixed cadence just to see how the shot displacement went on. Now fellas, some of you are going to mistake this for real science. This is not real science. This is bro science. There's loads of variables that are not controlled for with what we're doing here, but it is a data point that you can consider. Real quickly, I do need to tell you about W74 Guide Rods. W74 Guide Rods makes all of the tungsten accessories for your gun. Tungsten is a very hard metal to machine, and they figured out a way to do it that offers tungsten accessories for your gun for the absolute best price. Dusting off your high school chemistry days, W is the abbreviation for tungsten on the periodic table, and 74 is the atomic weight of tungsten. So if you want to unleash the atomic power of tungsten, you can check out guide rods at w74guiderods.com. They make them for all different kinds of pistols. Thank you, W74, for sponsoring the video. All right, so let's dive in. But since YouTube's not gonna let me monetize this video, I should probably tell you that on LOK Grips, you can save 10% with code HUMBLE. Optics Planet, you can use code HUMB. There you go. So first configuration is with the G10s on the gun. So immediately when you're watching the slow motion video, you'll notice that going from just the base gun to the tungsten guide rod gun, the recoil impulse smooths out quite a bit and is much, much smoother when you're shooting it. What's interesting is if you look at the X300 on the other two, the X300 is flopping around on the gun in recoil. And that wobble is even more exaggerated when I add the 5 ounces from the tungsten batteries. But what did that do to our hits? So I've got the 10-yard and 25-yard targets shooting at a fixed cadence, and I'm just pulling the trigger and observing where the dot is moving. I'm not necessarily trying to correct for each shot. I'm just observing it and focusing really hard on the target, trying to get the dot to go back to what I'm looking at. It jumps around quite a bit. I don't know that I like how the gun is balanced right here. Let's see at 25. 25, I think having the muzzle weight does kind of help, but let's go look at those hits. At 10 yards, the W74 guide rod configuration definitely delivered the tightest accuracy. But if you look at 25 yards, I actually ended up losing my grip on the gun and throwing one over the shoulder, but the grouping at 25 was pretty strong all the same. You see a nice vertical string in the holes. That's actually what you want, because vertical means that I haven't figured out the timing of how to shoot at that distance with that gun and that load. So vertical is good. That means it's recoiling straight up and down. When you see shot displacement that is on the kind of the horizontal, that's not as good because that means the gun's kind of wobbling around as I pull the trigger and recoiling. And if you look at the hits from the weapon mounted light, you can see that the horizontal opened up quite a bit. Now I think some of that is due to the Canex grip tang and how it is contoured, because it's not like a hammer fired gun that kind of nestles nicely into the crease between your pointer and thumb. It's kind of got this broad thing, and so it kind of isn't as stable. You can get a lot of yaw kind of left and right with it. And I think that was exaggerated by the weapon mounted light kind of wobbling around. I mean, if you look at that thing bouncing around in recoil, like it's introducing a bunch more kind of gyrations front and back and even side to side. So it's creating more of like a dynamic weight at the front of the gun that I'm trying to stabilize, which penalized my accuracy at 25 yards, even in the heavy configuration. So of this grouping of configurations, I definitely picked the tungsten guide rod. And just for grins, here are the configurations of the pistol and what they weigh on a kitchen scale. Pause it if you want to read it. So right away, we've already learned one thing, and that is you have to properly fit a weapon mounted light to your Picatinny rail. Just because the light fits on the gun, like you can see that a little bit of play. I'm like, it's good enough. I'll just let it see. You can see what it does in slow motion. So, you know those little extra keys that they give you for the lights? Make sure you get one that fits your gun if you want the best performance from it. Jumping over to the thin brass grips. Now the thin brass grips, as I mentioned, add about 9 ounces to the heel of the gun, making the gun much more grip heavy than it would be otherwise. All right, that behaves. It's definitely butt heavy. It's wanting to put its nose in the air. So we're sitting at about 49 ounces, which is nearly 5 Ruger LCP2s. I don't know what you do with 5 of those things either, but it weighs about the same as them. At 49 ounces, the gun doesn't feel too heavy. It's definitely very heavy, but it doesn't feel too heavy. It's probably on the upper end of what I would tolerate for a competition pistol, but you know, it's pretty nice. Bounces around a little bit more when it's heel heavy like that, like the muzzle doesn't seem to want to come back down. So looking at the gun recoiling, you can see as the gun gets progressively heavier, there is less movement on the gun in recoil, but that doesn't necessarily lead to better hits on the target. I would say the base configuration of just adding the brass grips made the biggest difference as far as how the gun was performing. And yet again, the weapon mounted light seems to destabilize the gun in recoil, because when you look at the hits, they're just opened up and sort of all over the place, which doesn't make sense. I honestly expected the weapon mounted light to kind of help smooth out where the hits were showing up, but that's not what happened. And here's a picture of the different weights in the various configurations on the screen for you to check out. Now, the Palm Swell brass grips, these are 3 ounces heavier than the other brass grips that we just tested. These things are porky and they feel fantastic. I'm a fan of Palm Swell grips, and the gridlock texture on these is really, really nice. I'm just generally a fan of the gridlocks from LOK. The porky grips on here, the base weight is 52 ounces, going up to a staggering 63 ounces. That is nearly 4 pounds. Which is still about a ½ pound lighter than a Desert Eagle. You know, I've been thinking about shooting a USPSA match with a Desert Eagle in 50 AE, and I'll do it. I'll spend the money and I'll do it, but you have to like this video and comment. If this video gets 2,500 likes and 1,500 comments in the first month, I will go out and spend an irresponsible amount of money to make that happen. It's absolutely going to punish my wrists, which are computer wrists and only tolerate 9mm cartridges. And dude, the ammo's like $1.50 a round. So like the video if you want to see that, or don't, and I can save my money. So either way, I appreciate you guys. Might as well check and see that you're subscribed. All right, fat boy configuration of the gun. Looking at the guns in recoil, there is almost no movement. The pistols are super smoothed out. The weapon mounted light still flopping around like it likes to do, but you notice when you put that heavy tungsten battery infused weapon mounted light at the front, that massive, it's like a 9-pound frame weight at that point. And the 12-ounce grips at the rear of the gun balances pretty good, and as a result, look at these hits, man. At 25 yards, the heavy configuration got the best hits at 25 all day. That's actually really interesting. There's not a lot of muzzle movement, but it bounces around quite a bit. All right, let's look at those. I think that was actually pretty good. Sure, there's that flyer off to the left there, but don't worry about that little guy. So I grabbed the base grip model just to see what happens if we move the gun balance to the rear, because the G10 grips weigh roughly the same as the plastic grips that come on the gun. I just took that base condition, comparing those three. You can see them in recoil here as the balance moves progressively rearward and how the gun is moving. I can say that personally, I think I preferred probably the medium brass grips to kind of smooth out the balance of the gun, put it more in the heel of the gun between all of those different options. But if I take the best performer of the 3 different grip configurations, so that would be the G10 plus tungsten guide rod, the regular brass grips only, and the heavy grips with the tungsten batteries and the weapon mounted light, and compare them, you can see that the Fat Boy configuration absolutely doesn't move. The performance was better, but it wasn't a ton better than just the G10s with the tungsten guide rod. So which configuration do I think I prefer the most? I'll tell you, but first the bonus content. Bonus content time, everybody excited? I can tell you're excited. The P365 AXG Legion. So LOK Grips also has brass grips for this. So I tested them against the aluminum grips, which have the exact same texture as the brass grips, just to see what happens, because this gun is super balanced. It's, I would say, a little bit grip heavy, because you can see it kind of wants to lift up and tilt backward when I kind of take my hand off the gun. So what happens if we put more weight in the grip of the pistol versus just kind of a more balanced approach? And the answer is the gun moves around less. So for years, we've been trying to put weight in the dust cover with these heavy dust covers, full-length dust covers, and these big fat guide rods and all that kind of stuff. And it seems like putting weight in the grip does seem to help the performance at speed of the guns. What configuration would I actually prefer is actually the tungsten guide rod version of the G10 grip. That's amazingly better. I'm sure it's going to do better at 25 too. That just feels more predictable. I like the way the gun bounces and returns a lot better. This setup with the G10s and the tungsten guide rod seems pretty awesome. Let's go look at those hits. While the slide movement of this configuration was a little bit more lively, I kind of like the feedback. It feels more like an open gun, so I really did kind of like that. I mean, it should have been a spoiler when you saw the green grips on there. You can't tell that that's the tungsten guide rod, but that's the tungsten guide rod. But the gun really has a slight muzzle-heavy bias with that tungsten guide rod, but the added traction and just kind of the ergos of the grip seem to make it kind of plant. I just like how the gun points better. It's not too heavy at this point. It's just over 40 ounces. It feels really nice. It gives me an uncaptured guide rod so I can mess with spring weights if I wanted to do that. And yeah, so that's the configuration that I ended up liking. If you want to see how all of this nonsense works on Glock pistols, back before I was a fancy man with fancy cameras, you can watch this video.